going to South Carolina. We have put in the ad buy. We're there. This has always been a marathon. It's never been a sprint.
I don't care if she stays there. Let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter.
4 hours before polls are going to close in New Hampshire, and Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are making the rounds. Is that Elise? Yeah. Okay. You just gotta be faster. Is Elise gonna be doing it or Darren? Whoever's gonna be doing it in 5 minutes is who I want doing it.
Hey, Scott, just a heads up. We're about a minute out. You're going to see some music, a Nikki soundbite, and then we're going to intro you, okay?
going to South Carolina. We have put in the ad buy. We're there. This has always been a marathon. It's never been a sprint.
I don't care if she stays in. Let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter.
4 hours left until those polls close up in New Hampshire, where former President Donald Trump is hoping for a big win against Nikki Haley in order to secure his path to the GOP nomination. Haley wants to pull out an upset victory or keep Trump's margin of victory within single digits, even as she's vowed to stay in the race regardless of the outcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Welcome to this hour of America's Vote 2024, the New Hampshire primaries. And joining me now is Scott Tranter from the Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thanks for joining us. I want to talk specifically about the delegates, because that's really, when people talk about momentum, what they mean. Trump needs to get 1,215 delegates in order to get the majority of delegates. How is Haley jockeying for an opportunity to prevent that from happening in order to force a contested convention?
Well, right now she's sitting in third. Ron DeSantis, who dropped out, actually has one more delegate than she does right now. I would suspect after tonight's voting, she will go into second place. But it looks like Donald Trump, if we're to believe the polls, and you know what, the polls are pretty predictive this cycle so far, Donald Trump is on pace to have enough of those delegates by mid-March. There's about 150 delegates up in the month of February across a few states, but the big pot of delegates is going to be in the first 2 weeks of March when we do dozens of states called Super Tuesday. I don't necessarily see a path for Haley to do that right now, but if there is one, it's going to start in New Hampshire, where she's going to have to upset and reverse that trend.
So if she doesn't pull out a victory tonight, even if it's close, even if it's single digits between her and Trump, what type of spin is the Haley campaign going to be doing in order to justify her campaign from moving forward?
Well, I think she's going to highlight the fact that now that it's a two-person race, as she likes to say, she's closing the gap, and she's going to call for a debate. We've got a couple of weeks until we get to South Carolina, so she gets to potentially take some of that single-digit momentum and see if she can turn it into something, maybe single digits or a win in her home state of South Carolina. But that's a lot of ifs, and that's a lot of hurdles she's going to have to overcome.
Well, and you've got Senator Tim Scott, who is a current member of the South Carolina delegation, who has backed Trump, of course. But if Haley is going to have an upset victory, it's going to be in large part because of independent voters and the way that New Hampshire primary works. Explain to me how that could provide an opening for Haley to pull out an upset.
Well, what a unique aspect of the New Hampshire primaries are, if you're a registered independent, there are hundreds of thousands in New Hampshire, you can decide which primary you want to vote in, either Democrat or Republican. Now, Joe Biden's not officially on the ballot on the Democratic side. It's candidates like Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips, although we do expect Joe Biden to probably win as a write-in on the Democratic side. By and large, the Democratic primary is not interesting. So if you're an independent voter and you have a choice between the Democrat primary and the Republican primary, you're probably going to vote in the Republican primary, especially if you're a left-leaning independent voter. And that's really what Nikki Haley's is leaning on. She's hoping that those independent voters are going to come out tonight. They're going to vote in the GOP primary. And we should see if that's going to be the case when we start seeing some votes out of Nashua, Manchester, some of the more urban areas, if she's able to hold her own there.
And she wasn't able to hold her own in Iowa, in suburban Des Moines or other parts of the suburbs in Iowa. Obviously, a very different electorate between Iowa and New Hampshire. What are some of the differences, according to the Decision Desk HQ polling, that you've seen reflective in those who are voting in Iowa versus New Hampshire?
Well, it's interesting. New Hampshire voters tend to be, they pride themselves on being a little bit more independent streak. They tend to be more fiscally aligned rather than on the social issues, as opposed to some of those Iowa caucus voters. And there are a few different issues locally in New Hampshire. I mean, the opioid crisis is big. It's a thing in Iowa too, but it's more so in the Northeast. New Hampshire voters tend to be independent, and we might be seeing that, especially with where we might see some of these independent voters come out tonight for Nikki Haley.
Yeah, I was surprised back on the campaign trail in the previous two cycles, going up to that northern part of New Hampshire, very rural, very, very rural communities that are very much been pummeled by the opioid addiction crisis. And in contrast to that, though, she's gotten a huge boost from the state's governor, Chris Sununu, who Trump has gone after. But what impact might the governor have on tonight's race?
Well, what's interesting is Ron DeSantis had Governor Kim Reynolds in Iowa, and that didn't help him. I guess he overperformed his polls, but he didn't come in a close second. Nikki Haley's got Chris Sununu. Chris Sununu comes from a storied family in New Hampshire. He's a proven winner in New Hampshire. I just don't know that that's enough, especially when you compare it to the fact that Donald Trump is his best endorsement, right? He is the strongest brand out there. Chris Sununu is strong, but we have already seen one state where the governor didn't go with Donald Trump, but we didn't see an impact. So I'm not quite sure what we're going to see out of him today.
So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he dropped out of the race. As you mentioned, he does have right now 8 delegates, according to the Decision Desk HQ delegate counter. He's in second place in the delegate race. But he's backed Donald Trump. He's endorsed Donald Trump. What impact might his supporters have in expanding the margin of victory for the former president tonight? Because albeit he was polling third in New Hampshire in single digits in many polls, but his departure from the race could expand the margin of victory for Trump, could it not?
Yeah, no, look, when we've looked at both the News Nation polling done as well as other public polls out there, Ron DeSantis supporters, their second choice overwhelmingly is Donald Trump. So even though his 9% is small and considerably behind Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's number tonight, what he's looking for is he's looking to perform over 50. And it's interesting, before Ron DeSantis got out in the DDHQ, the Hill polling average, he was averaging below 50. Right now, he's on the edge of 50 and probably going to edge up here if we get any last-minute polls in today. And so I think that's largely can be due to the fact that Ron DeSantis is out and the majority of supporters went over to Donald Trump.
So you contrast that with a guy who had a hot mic problem, right? Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. And he, Scott, you're laughing, but it's true. He had a hot mic problem. He got out of the race.
I think that might have been a little on purpose.
Yeah, and hey, it's the intrigue that is the buzz inside the Beltway, Scott. We've talked about it.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is he didn't back Haley, and he said that Haley doesn't have what it takes to beat Trump. And the reason I bring that up is you've got Christie, and the general consensus was that Christie supporters were going to go to Nikki Haley. Then you contrast that with DeSantis, and he's backing Trump. But are Christie supporters really going to go to Haley? And might that actually hurt her because of that hot mic issue?
Yeah, well, look, the hot mic issue wasn't on purpose. That's the second time that Chris Christie has kind of played the spoiler in a New Hampshire primary. The last time was 2016. I laughed because it was definitely a hot mic issue. I questioned whether or not that was on purpose or not, because this is a contested presidential race, and I've seen worse. But yeah, you bring up a good point. There is a wash there. Chris Christie's voters, probably initially, if he kept his mouth shut or supported Nikki Haley, would have probably a good chunk of them would have flowed over there. To the extent that he has sway over his voters, they certainly heard that, and they took into account. I don't know that all of them paid attention to it, but let me put it this way: it didn't help her, and neither did Ron DeSantis getting out. So those are two counter trends for her going into election night.
Scott, your group has been ahead on this, which is what issues are voters really paying attention to? What are they thinking about? And specifically, they're thinking about immigration. And it's actually surpassed the economy as issue number 1 in the race for 2024. Why do you think immigration is playing so incredibly strongly in a state specifically like the Granite State, New Hampshire?
Well, we look at it from two different angles, immigration. One is because of how immigration has transpired and evolved in the last couple of years with the things around busing and the fact there's record numbers coming across, it has become an economic issue, not just at the border, but in places like New York and places like Chicago. And this is something GOP voters have picked up on. So this is, immigration has really moved on from a border state issue to a, hey, if I live in a city or I live in a neighborhood, I'm impacted by this and it affects my pocketbook. So that's why I kind of look at it as, to your point, immigration is the number one issue, but a lot of the GOP voters, especially away from the border, are looking at it through an economic lens.
I also think they're looking at it through an opioid addiction lens as well. Quickly, just in the little bit of time we have left, when do you think we're going to get a result called tonight? What time frame?
I hesitate to postulate. New Hampshire is interesting, right? There are 2 poll closing times in New Hampshire. One at 7 o'clock, and there are a few that close at 8 o'clock. So you won't see any responsible network make a projection until 8 o'clock Eastern. So we'll wait to see then. But if Donald Trump lives up to the polls, which I have no reason to believe not to, I think you could see a call early in the night.
The later it goes, the better the news for Nikki Haley. That's what I'm hearing. Scott Tranter, our man at Decision Desk HQ. Nobody knows those crosstabs better than my buddy Scott Tranter. Scott, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next hour with another update on America's Vote 2024.